I was never one much for gory horror movies. Couldn't stand them. I didn't get what pleasure people got out of watching others getting mutilated and shredded. Those movies. Saw, I think they were called. Grotesque, boring, and mindless horror. So I just usually watched the good and the shitty of hauntings and just white people being stupid. The funny thing is, they capture it pretty well how they act when faced with horrors and sudden death. But people don't scream or sob as much. They just usually whimper and cry quietly. Most often, they just freeze like deer in the headlights. People always expect Friday the 13th or something like that when you think of horror movies coming alive, but I assure you it's not. It's more like when you are looking through your fridge trying to decide between leftover Chinese or pizza. You don't know until you pick one. But then you pick both in the end. It's always funny the look on their faces when they see me. It's usually a 6-foot guy with a machete they're looking for, but not a 5'2" girl. It's a normal morning in Arlington, Georgia. Small town girl. Ironic, I know. I'm getting some breakfast before heading out. My folks are chatting over some coffee and eggs. I cringe. I never got why or how people could wash down food with that crap. I say a quick goodbye before slamming the door. My ride is a small rundown car, but it works. I throw my backpack in the back seat as I sit down into the driver's seat. What should I do today? I ask myself. I sat there for a few minutes, then it came to me. My drive was a good long one. I went on the highway and drove for a good 3 hours until I arrived in Riverdale. I drove around for a while until it started getting dark. I found myself growing hungry, so I headed to a local diner and got the most common thing in the world: burgers and fries. I was going to regret that later. Stuffed, I headed back to my car and drove to a suburb where I looked at houses and imagined living there one day. It was relaxing, just driving around with no phone or anything, just me in the car. After a while, I drove out of the suburb and into a residential area. I was driving slowly up the road when I saw a group of teenagers, not much older than me, and one of them looked perfect. He was the one. Strong, tall, and handsome. I found a secluded area where I parked my car, and I got my backpack and got dressed. It was an old Halloween costume, Alice in Wonderland, one of my favorites as a kid, but I had worn it when I was 15. My build hadn't changed much since then. I scoffed at the tear in my dress as I hiked up my stockings. I looked good in this. Too bad it wasn't Halloween, I thought. The blue dress hugged me tight, and the frills looked pretty, and my dark hair looked tousled but good. I applied my makeup so I was pale, and my cheeks with red and lips black, and around my eyes were also black. I looked like a little child who, well, looked demented. I was ready, and the hunt was on. I wore a hoodie, so people would find it as noticeable, my get-up. I walked around looking for the group of kids. Nothing. I looked for a while until I stumbled upon a park, and there were a lot of people there considering the time. I tilted my head and walked up the paved path. What a strange thing, I thought. Maybe there is some kind of thing happening. Maybe I will just have to find somebody else here. I was right. I did. He was there, and so was another boy, younger. I knew I wanted them both. I slowly walked around, watching the people and listening. No one really paid attention to me, but I didn't care. I just wanted them. Both. Tonight. As the final rays of sun dissipated, I made my move. I walked over to them. They were sitting on a bench that was pretty big. They were close to picnic tables, and I picked one of the closest ones. I sat down and crossed my legs and folded my arms. I stared at the night sky, wondering who would make the first move. I heard the quiet chatter of their voices. It was soothing and invigorating at the same time, then rustling, and I looked up. He was heading towards me. I raised an eyebrow and watched him get closer. "Hey," he awkwardly stated. "You, chick on the table." "Yes," I answered slowly. "Got a lighter?" he asked. What a shame that this was the extent of our chat. Well, not completely. He did ask why. Fast forward a few hours. I followed him for a while until he went into a small house. There, I waited until he came back outside, and eventually he did. It was cold and dark, and I was tired, and my stomach hurt, but I was set on this. He made it too easy. He went through the same park as earlier and went into a heavily wooded area where a small bench was, and he sat down. I watched him for a few minutes before I dropped my hoodie and took out my knife. He seemed startled at first, but then grinned. Funny how guys always assume girls want them. Neither said a word. I just straddled him and sat on his lap, looking at him. He probably saw me as well. But what he didn't see was the knife. I just love the wet crunch as I put the sharp blade through the ribs and into the heart. How you feel the pulse through the blade. How the eyes suddenly just go dull. But just before the fear, anger and hate light them up. But the only thing he said, well, whispered, was, "Why?" "My lovely, there is no why I did this. I just did," I whispered into his dead ear. I sat like this for a while, just resting my chin on his shoulder, feeling the way his body pressed against mine and how the heat slowly went away. But the bulge in his pants stayed the whole time, probably after I left. I would be lying if I said it didn't turn me on. After I removed the knife from his chest and covered up the wound, I laid him down on his side on the bench, leaving him sleeping there. I blew a kiss towards him as I went to get my hoodie. I was sad that this short love affair was over. My mother was relieved when I got home in the morning. There is apparently a serial killer in Georgia. She thought I might have been killed, but I told her not to worry. No one would want to kill a girl like me. I listened to the news as I ate my breakfast. Pancakes. Mommy spoils me. The news anchor was grim as she told the story about 3 murders that had been committed that night in Riverdale. I huffed. There were 5, but whatever.